Buenos días a todos, siendo hoy jueves 25 de junio, vamos a iniciar este webinar y lo vamos a iniciar en inglés. Este es un webinar que va a estar en inglés y como siempre les recordamos que por favor mantengan sus micrófonos apagados, sus videos apagados y cambio de idioma. Gracias. Thank you for coming. This is June 25th, and we welcome you to our webinar today. The session will be recorded and it will be put up in the YouTube channel, Lawit group, and it will be available for your convenience and sharing. So thank you very much for attending on live today. And let me introduce you to Juan Carlos Luna, the CEO of Lawit.
Buenos días, good morning, good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. Let me just share with you very briefly just a very quick introduction of who we are and why we're putting these events together. Lawit is the legal innovation and legal technology arm of logistic, and basically what we do is we're a legal management consulting firm helping law firms and corporate legal departments increase their legal performance. That's the main activity that we provide, along with the legal services side of it through logistic. One of the well, Alex will comment on this kind of thought that created the interest in launching these events.
Yeah, of course, as we all are experiencing now, and for the past 3 months or more in some other places, we definitely live in a moment of unprecedented uncertainty for a lot of people. We would like to focus more on the opportunity side of things, and we see and feel that this is a real great opportunity to reinvent ourselves and use the technologies that are available, that a lot of people have been talking about, trying to implement, and now it's a must-have and not a nice-to-have. Right now, customers are expecting different types of services, different times of services, and with this pandemic and the working from home situation, technology is definitely the way to go. So our webinars are talking about all this from different perspectives, and this is what Lawit 8 is. And it's a series of streamings with very interesting people from all around the world sharing their experiences from the ground, working with companies, advising companies. And this is a very short time. We try to keep this under an hour, but with a lot of content and experience that you can take to your practice, to your law firm, to your legal department, and actually start making the changes that are part of this digital transformation.
And today we have the privilege and the pleasure of having two good friends and truly international experts, very influential in their own areas, MORAY McLaren and Richard McLean. They come from, different perspectives. Richard is in Madrid. Richard is in London. MORAY is in Madrid. They have different roles. Richard running as global vice chair of Dentons. He'll mention a little bit about this tiny law firm. And MORAY will comment on the perception and perspective of key local players on a national and regional basis. The topic is how the current crisis is accelerating changes in the market for legal services. We believe when we put this topic together with MORAY and Richard that this is a critically important topic for anyone involved in the legal industry transformation. So Richard, MORAY, if you can turn your cameras on and mics on, and we will start your comments and presentation.
Thank you very much.
And please, I'm going to just share this slide. I mean, you can comment and Richard, introduce yourself, and then I'll do the same with MORAY, and get started, please.
Would you like me to introduce myself? I can do that very quickly.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so Richard MACKLIN, Global Vice Chair of Dentons, now the largest law firm in the world. I'm also Global Client Partner, so I'm Head of Client Relationships for the client across the world. I've been privileged to, I'm very old, I've worked for the firm for 35 years in London, New York, Brussels and Paris, where I ran some of the offices. I headed the M&A department for a long time and now sit on the global board amongst those other roles I mentioned. And yeah, it's great to be with you. So thanks for having me. Over to you, Murray.
Thank you, Richard. MORAY.
Well, thank you very much. Well, Richard, if you're very old, I guess I'm old. No, so I'm just old. Nice to see you, Richard. I hope everything is fine with you in London. So my name is Murray Mclaren. I wear a number of hats. I've been a consultant for many years. I advise the global law firms as they enter new markets, and I advise the top local law firms as they try and work out what's happening in a changing world. Lexington works in frontier markets. We work a lot in Latin America, and we've been working particularly in Mexico. So that's by way of introduction. I should probably say thank you to Alejandro and Juan for inviting us today. I had the great pleasure of having Juan in my class. I live in Madrid, and Juan came to study with us in IE Law School. And I seem to remember over a beer or two his plans to start up a new business in Mexico, which became Lawit. So I feel particularly honored to be with you and particularly proud of what Juan and Alejandro have been doing. So our topic today is, what extent do we think that COVID will actually accelerate change within law firms? We'll start off by talking about the impact of the crisis on the clients. Of course, there's nothing more important than the clients. We'll then talk about what this means in very practical terms for law firms. And we'll end up at the end of 45 minutes talking about what are the things that you in your law firms need to be doing. Now, I need to start with a confession. Richard and I have known each other for 20 years. We tend to agree on most things, but if Richard and I sit and agree with each other for 45 minutes, it won't be very interactive or interesting for you guys. I'm going to be the devil's advocate. Richard's going to talk about the perspective from a global law firm of what's happening on the macro level, and I'm going to ask the difficult questions and say, but what does that mean for a domestic law firm in Latin America? What does that mean for a Spanish law firm or a Mexican law firm? So, Richard, apologies in advance if I'm pushing you, and I hope we end up finishing the session still being friends.
It'll be a good test.
It'd be a good test. So let's kick off, shall we? We always start with the clients, and we know why we start with the clients. And your role at Dentons is coordinating the relationships for your firm with them. What do you think is changing in the client's world? What are the sort of headlines there?
Well, I mean, let's start with the fact that, of course, there is, as we know, a lot of bad stuff out there, and a lot of people are suffering both personally and financially through all of this. And anything we say that follows this, we don't want to belittle that at all, because we're conscious this is a true human crisis. And the other thing I would say on the economic front is that although at the moment, what we're seeing is, if you like, the health crisis of the pandemic, hospitals being overloaded, what we are, I think, going to see is a double dip. We can see some of the markets coming back right now. If you look at the FTSE, if you look at Dow Jones, etc., it's a bit flaky, but it's up and down, but it's mainly actually working its way slowly up. However, I think that when the full cost is counted of how much this is going to cost to put right what we're doing right now, to recover from where we are, I think personally, there's going to be quite a frightening double dip. So in economic terms, you know, there's plenty to come. Having said that, there are reasons to be cheerful. And that's one of the things we want to talk about today, because there's going to be a lot of change. I know everyone's talking about the new normal, the new abnormal, whatever you want to call it. But the bottom line is, as we know, as always, the winners in times of change are the ones who see it as an opportunity, not a threat, and adapt accordingly. So it might be helpful when we're looking at the market to sort of segment into two basic categories what's happening out there client-wise. And certainly our observation is you've got temporary change going on in a very violent way in some industries, and then you've got a more permanent change where the toothpaste is truly out of the tube and not going to go back in other parts of the market. And I'll just pick out some simple examples of that because we find it helps us categorize how we react, respond, and try and help and partner with our clients who are in at least as much threat and trouble as we are as a business. And the first, let's look at the temporary changes. For example, if you take leisure, hospitality, yeah, we all know it's having an awful, awful time. However, we are going to go back on holiday. We are going to go back into restaurants, aren't we? Some of you, many of you listening, I'm sure already in places where that may already be happening. So there's an immediate crisis that needs help, and there are ways to address that. But ultimately, it's going to come back in some form. Again, other things that happen that are large but temporary are things like fraud, for example. That's something we're focusing on very closely, because what we've observed in previous crises is that during these desperate times of crisis, people tend to do desperate things or even naughty things or dishonest things. And the largest investigations that tend to come out across the world, and you can see this as a good thing or a bad thing, as an opportunity as a law firm, but not great from an economic point of view or a political point of view, is some of the largest crises. If you think of Bernie Madoff, for example, if the tide hadn't gone out after Lehman's, he wouldn't have been exposed, at least not at that time. If you think of LIBOR interest rate scandal, again, one can question how and why that happened, but it happened during a time of desperation, let's call it, economically. So those things happen. So there's going to be sort of, if you want to see this opportunity from immediate, temporary shock to the system, but ultimately, over time, that will go away as the markets recover. There are also things like pockets of liquidity that we're quite interested in. So if you look at China, okay, they're sort of traditionally seen as a wall of cash buying up large parts of the world. And there's quite a lot of activity from them in Latin America over recent years as well. But because of this different cycle of what's happening to the health crisis, but also the economic crisis, as parts of the world come out faster or earlier than other parts who are still in the crisis, that creates an arbitrage where I think there are going to be a lot of assets on the ground that's going to create a lot of M&A, a lot of distressed M&A, and some quite different changes in who holds the shares, who holds the power in quite a lot of organizations and corporates across the world that isn't the case right now. Similarly, sovereign wealth in the Middle East is probably less effective. You can take advantage of some of those distressed assets. So just something to watch out for. But again, it's temporary, because ultimately, as everybody comes out in the end, it'll flatten again, and that arbitrage will settle down to normal levels again. Then if we look at some of the more, I give two examples of permanent change. Take the air industry, yeah? Take airlines. Those are never going to go back to normal. Okay, because look what we're doing now. We've just worked out that, lovely though it would be all to be in a super hotel in Mexico City, having flown business class to get there if we're lucky, we're not actually doing that. And we're doing it, we're fine, aren't we? Sadly. And therefore, we've worked out that there's not going to be so much travel. And that, of course, ripples across the industry, as we know. And indeed, one of the airlines that we're talking to right now, we're talking to them about telepresence as an alternative way of making money, by which I mean, you probably know there's that hologram technology that exists that makes 3D meetings possible on a technological basis. It's almost as if somebody's in the room. Why not brand that via an airline, okay, and change the way that you actually operate? Because an airline is not going to go back ever to normal. So it's got to think of changing its business model. Final example, real estate, okay? We've worked out, haven't we, that we don't really need all those offices. Now, you may be folks all thinking of going back to exactly the same beautiful oak paneled offices with gorgeous glass covered corner offices. You may, but in many parts of the world, we're not, because we've worked out it's very expensive. It's our largest fixed cost apart from our people. And in fact, we can operate very, very well on a different basis. And also, if you think of Main Street, you think of Fifth Avenue, you know, Are those large shops always going to be there because we're buying everything online? So, you know, is Saks Fifth Avenue going to become actually a warehouse for Amazon? Who knows? But it's not going to go back to how it was. And so there are parts of the industry, of the sectors, of the markets that we can, as lawyers, as service providers, and that's certainly what we are doing, look at and see what is the post-COVID world going to look like? Where is the puck moving to? And can we be there to catch it? So in a nutshell, those are a few things that we're seeing in the market.
Thank you very much. And then what about the opportunities? There must be some sectors that are taking off at the moment.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's logistics, of course. And I mean, we're focused very much on logistics. We're focused also on not so much areas of the market, but practice areas like litigation. I think we all know, don't we, folks, that, you know, when in times of crisis, litigation goes up, M&A transactions go down because we're all trying to squeeze more money out of the deal that we wish we hadn't done now that the crisis has struck. So there's that. But we're also looking at things like portfolio funding because we think that there's a lot of litigation that will have great chance of success, 80+ chance of success, but which cash-strapped companies who have those rights and claims will not be able to follow. And therefore, we think the litigation funders who tend to sit on the sort of outside of the market will come in mainstream. So just another example of how we think
very good.
opportunities will come.
Very, very good. You know what's happened? Since we spoke last, Richard, a few weeks ago, the majority of law firms I've been working with, there's good news and there's bad news, isn't there? I think the good news that I've seen is that law firms have been better able to survive this short-term crisis than we expected. But I think in the longer term, there is bad news. And I'm thinking of that quote from Bill Gates. We always overestimate the short-term change and we underestimate the longer-term change. So what are you seeing as the specific opportunities and challenges for law firms coming out of the current crisis?
Well, I think if we go back to, we can learn something from the last crisis. If we look at the last crisis, the Lehman's crisis, financial crisis, 2008, 2009, that caused enormous change in the way we deliver our services because it became a buyer's market. And I imagine it was similar in the Latin American market, whereby we just had to work that little bit harder. And there was a phrase that was very common in those days and that stuck with it, which was more for less. A lot of clients were saying, you got to give me more for less because I, as a legal department, have to deliver more for less to my internal client because they've cut my budget, slashed half my people. So what are you going to do about it? And they were asking us to, as lawyers, the legal profession, I don't know if this resonates with people listening, but certainly we found they were asking us to change our business model, kill the hourly rate, just do it different. Give us cost certainty, we can't do it anymore. And we kind of managed to resist that, didn't we? Basically, what we ultimately did, we managed to, again, to squeeze a little bit more value for the client out of the dollar, or whatever it was, that they paid us. We managed to find ways of creating some efficiencies in, let's face it, what are pretty inefficient businesses, partnerships. So we started to use more pretty low-tech technology, contract automation, e-billing, all that kind of thing. We started to disaggregate a little bit. Why do everything in very, very expensive offices in New York City, London, or indeed Mexico City, when perhaps we could use offices in cheaper places with excellent lawyers inside them? Maybe we could partner with other law firms who were better at small parts of the work than we were. So there were ways we could squeeze more margin out. But that's basically as far as I think the profession went. It still charged an hourly rate. It just did it in a way that delivered more for less while still maintaining a margin. I think what will happen now is two things have changed because of this crisis. The first one is that the technology is there now that wasn't there before. Now, just look at us communicating this way already, okay? That's different, okay? Artificial intelligence is coming. I wouldn't say it's arrived yet in full form, but machine learning, certainly for due diligence and other tasks, is working pretty well now. So this technology has arrived, and I think that's, or at least is a lot of it has improved greatly, such that some of the human element can now be reduced, therefore the cost reduced. That's the first thing. The second thing is the thing we mentioned earlier, is the economic shock of what is going to occur as a result of this health crisis, the financial crisis, I don't think we can underestimate. And that is going to drive, of course, pressure on costs. And I think that the clients have a good chance this time of squeezing us further than more for less, and maybe they'll win and create a drive or be successful in creating a radical change to our business models, both in the way, for example, use our real estate by having fewer desks than people, hot desking, using, as I was saying before, offices that perhaps are outside the most expensive places, and also changing the way we deliver our services once and for all. Two things we're looking at is managed services. It's actually quite an old idea, but the bottom line is that it's almost an outsourcing of the client's in-house function to the law firm on a hermetically sealed, dedicated to the client-only basis at a fixed cost on a retainer. For example, with the use of a lot of technology, which we don't have time to go into now. And the second thing, which I just mentioned on the delivery side that I think is really going to change, is the use of data. Because again, the availability of data is so much richer now. We're looking, for example, at data-driven pricing. Because there is this drive for certainty in cost as much as reduction of cost, then instead of saying, well, we use this many hours, so by the end we can't really tell you how much it's going to cost, but when we get there, we'll tell you. We now are starting to look backwards and say, okay, well, we've done this kind of deal 9,000 times. And the cost range was okay. It was between 200,000 and 2 million. But through crunching the data, we can work out what the average is in certain, or weighted averages, and come out with, say, 350. And if we charge that every time, we can still make a margin, win some, lose some, but at the end make a margin. Just one example of how I think cost certainty will be a big thing in the future.
Yeah, very, very good. You won't remember, but we both spoke at an event 15 years ago in London. And when I asked you about a long time ago, that was before the last crisis, no? And you said, I asked you about how much the law firm model had changed. And you said, we haven't changed the model. We're only moving around the deck chairs on the deck of the Titanic. Yeah. You still think we're on the Titanic, or there is going to be a larger amount of change that's going to... We always talk about the new law firm model, but we don't see it, because you've already given my first red flag to say this may or may not be relevant to small law firms when we talk about the independent firms. The technology, machine learning, what does that mean for a 10, 20 partner law firm in Mexico City? You know, how are people going to afford this? So you do now think, hand on heart, we will be seeing a different model, or we're just talking hot air as usual about this topic?
Well, I think it'll happen at different paces in different markets, and that will be entirely dictated by clients, right? And of course, we all hate change, not just as lawyers, but as human beings. And whilst we've been talking about the new abnormal being this great opportunity, and we're all going to change the world and save the planet and change the way we do stuff, I'm really worried that actually we won't. And I think that will be a shame. I also think it will be quite dangerous. And certainly my personal view is this is an opportunity to embrace change, because that window of excitement is going to close quite quickly. And the winners are going to be, as ever, the ones who embrace change. Coming back to whether it's affordable or not affordable, these things, I think there is a good chance, actually, that a lot of the technologies that are out there, just like, you know, everyone's got e-billing, everyone can do contract automation. It's not hugely expensive. It's just the human input to make it work. I think that's going to come too on the AI products. I think that's going to come too on the office management, or the office management systems are already affordable. A lot of it, because it will sell on a much more pan-global basis. I think the price will come down, and also it will be a much more off-the-shelf product going forward. So yeah, I think it's possible. And I would warmly encourage people to look out for that. Might not be available in PC world, but I still think it's going to be more available.
I'm sitting taking notes, because I can see that when we come to talk about the domestic firms, I think some of them will change their model and some of them won't. And we can go into detail about which ones do need to do things differently, or which ones are going to survive doing exactly what they are now. Now, I would like to think a bit about the winners and the losers from this. And there's a lot been written about the stress and difficulties of lawyers. No, we have high records of alcoholism and depression amongst the profession. Do you think that resilience is an important part of this? And do you think that people are now taking this resilience question more seriously than they were before, just paying lip service to it?
Yeah, look, I mean, I think there are two types of resilience. There's organizational resilience. Let's call it things like cybersecurity, yeah, just for one example, crisis management, etc. And we've been having a go at that for some time. And actually, a lot of the businesses now in the legal profession are highly sophisticated around those models, because we've just had to be, because it's so fatal not to be. So organizational resilience has been out there for a while, and I think we're doing quite well on that. Personal resilience, individual resilience,
yeah,
that is something that we need to focus on much more. And I think, you know, back to the theme of this talk, all of these things that we're talking about were already happening. It's just that COVID has accelerated them, we think. And I know you think that too, Murray. And I think on, you know, resilience, personal resilience is where we need to focus next. And that's just a question of individuals being able to roll with the punches. And, you know, I mean, this is the third global crisis that I've been privileged to enjoy. And the first one, I can be absolutely honest, the dot-com bubble, I experienced total blind panic as a young man. We very, very, very nearly went bankrupt. The second time, the Lehman's, the financial crisis of 2008 and 9, I was very concerned, but I was pretty assured because I knew the drill from the last time. And this time actually, I'm pretty philosophical about it, because guess what? Spoiler alert, this isn't the last crisis we're going to see. The next one will be right along in about 10 years' time, if not less. So that experience, I think, is something that we as leaders can pass down to our people, and it's incumbent upon us to do it. But I also think, sorry.
No, I was going to say there's something there about flexibility then. No flexible approaches as we understand how to deal with these ongoing events. We probably won't even use the word crisis anymore.
Yes. Well, basically, yeah, life is a crisis these days, isn't it? I mean, it's just which one?
Continual change.
Running a business. Yes, continual change, and exactly. And I think that, I mean, we know it's not the strongest who survive; it's the most adaptable. That is absolutely true in our profession, like any other. I would just suggest that this is a time for us to be really decisive about being indecisive. By which I mean is constantly looking at the data, looking at the changes, because things change so fast. And of course, COVID has accelerated that. So there's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, we need to change course here. There's no shame in that. The only shame is to do it on an ill-informed basis. And if you are informed, you realize you need to be pretty adaptable pretty often.
So you're saying that there needs to be a change in leadership style. Was the past leadership style the right approach? And are we seeing a change in that?
So this is another one, actually, that I think, you know, COVID is accelerating, I hope, rather nicely. I mean, there's there's talk, which I thoroughly endorse, and I know you do too, Murray, about the need to change from motivational leadership to inspirational leadership. You know, which sounds a bit soft and fluffy, but what I mean by that is if you take motivational leadership, which is basically the traditional model we've all been using for centuries, it basically means, the theory goes, the more you pay people, you know, they'll do anything, right?
Yes,
but it reduces everything just down to a contract, doesn't it? So with our people, we say, you do this, I'll pay you that. Okay, you pay me that, I'll do this. But what if we move to a model where people did what they're doing through passion because they just wanted to do it, because we were inspired by the people leading us? And again, I know that sounds a bit soft, but there's lots and lots of evidence. Bain & Co., Harvard, we've looked at a few, you know, though if you boil it down, it basically comes down to about twice the productivity comes out of people who are inspired and, quote, in the flow because they're loving what they do, rather than doing it on the basis of contract. So there's lots of reasons why one should be doing it.
Well, this sounds like managing by outputs, not inputs, no? And there must have been a huge move to that when people weren't in the office anymore and you couldn't see whether they were working anymore.
Exactly. So, you know, definitely one of the key ingredients for becoming an inspirational leader is learning to trust. And
trust. My God, what a word. Trust.
And we're not very good at it as lawyers, are we? Because what we do is, especially with partners, we look at our team and we think if they're not there, you know, do you remember putting your jacket on the back of the chair when you were a kid because you wanted, because you wanted to be seen to be there? And yet, what does it matter if I produce a report at 4 a.m. in the morning next to the fridge in my pajamas? What does it matter? As long as the output delights the client and is on time. Yeah. And I know that's obvious in some ways, but I think we as lawyers have a real difficulty culturally in accepting and understanding that why do we have to control people as long as we get the output we need? So it's a really, and I think COVID is going to change that. Well, he's already changing it. Look, we're all working like this. Guess what? It works. Yeah. I don't know about other people on this call, but we found our productivity hasn't dropped at all. It's dropped, but it's starting to drop because of the economic effect of COVID. It has not dropped because we're working from home, which is interesting.
Yeah, totally. What I see is a huge shift towards the importance of the individual making an emotional contact with people. Is that because we're working through a crisis? We now know that lawyers tell me that they're now treating their juniors more like humans, okay? And we know about people's families, we know about the personal circumstances, and there's been maybe there's been a democratization in a way. I don't know if you feel the same in your law firm, where people are treating each other more as equals than they were before. Now, some of those cultural changes are quite radical compared to the old, I'm a partner, you're not a partner, command and control approach. Are you seeing those differences? And if you are, is it going to be back to business as normal, back to the old school, once everyone's in an office again?
I think, yeah, I mean, you're right about the way we're working now. I mean, remote teams are one reason why we just have to do it is when they're learning it's not bad. Also, I'd say I'd give a round of applause for Generation Z, actually, or Gen Z, the new generation coming through, who are going to be next at the wheel, because they are perfectly equipped to deal with this digital mindset that we need in order to communicate in this way. And you talk about the democratization of communication. This is interesting because everybody has equal prominence on the screen. And what we're certainly seeing is, yes, there is more equality in the way that people are communicating and feel able to communicate. Whereas before, I think there was some reticence to speak up in a room when you weren't quite sure whether you had the right to do so. We're all equal size on the screen in this, in these.
Well, it was you. I mean, you mentioned the word trust, and it's a very short word, but there are a lot of implications to that. And maybe there's more implications. Maybe there's implications in the typical model of a law firm and the way that the juniors become seniors. Maybe there's quite a lot of change required around that. But what we do, we're going to get questions from the audience at the end, and we'll see whether anyone wants to dig under. You've given me so much content there to shout back and say, what's this do to a small law firm? Do you mind if I jump into that now?
Jump in. Tell me what it looks like.
Yeah? Well, as you know, I work in front-end markets around the world, and people always say, but what's the difference in a Mexican law firm and an Indian law firm, or an English firm or a French firm? What I see is that there aren't strong cultural differences. The differences in law firms depends on the size of the firm and how long they've been going for. And about 80 or 90% of the issues are based on the type of firm it is. And there's about a 10%, which is actually the particular DNA you see in a firm based on the personalities. And we'll go into that in a little bit. But of course, that 10% unique DNA in a firm can throw the whole thing. It's very, very powerful. I've written down the things that I think are rather similar for the top independent firms: clients, people, and the service delivery bit. On the clients, I think we're all a bit guilty of thinking that the best client to follow was the international client. And if you look at a country like Mexico, in the good years, a top law firm would have 60% inbound work for those international clients and 40% would be domestic. Now we know that that has to reverse. And now, interestingly enough, it's the local clients at this time in the economic cycle that are more interesting. The international clients are very tough. The local clients, it's really about building a strong relationship with them. And the domestic firms have already been much better at that, working with the local clients, than some of the international firms. And maybe we'll cycle back to how we think the international firms are doing. So loyalty, trust, is the key thing with the client relationship. So I think there's a difference there. On the people, I did wonder whether Gen Y as a concept translated well into markets that were fast growing. Now we've moved on to Gen Z. I'm seeing much more similarity between young lawyers globally. So the younger lawyers, I mean, you'll remember, Richard, the good old days. You started in a law firm, you'd be grateful for your job. And if the managing partner said, wash my car, you'd be out the back with your sleeves rolled up and you'd be washing their car. We have a young group of people that are very determined.
I did actually do that, actually. I actually
you are
did
joking.
That once. I did. In Paris. Long story.
Okay, we'll come back to that afterwards, no? So that doesn't wash, no joke intended, that doesn't wash with the younger generation. For them, it's about engagement, it's about purpose. We did talk about work-life balance, but it's really about work-life integration. They are very involved in other things, and we have to find the right balance to do that. So that particular part, which is a huge challenge to the typical law firm up or out model, you sink or swim, I think that sink or swim model has to change, especially because the main motivation of that model was to become partner. And just imagine if we have younger lawyers that may not want to be partner. So you're totally right. It's not the carrot of partnership or money. It's starting with people now and saying, what's the deal? What's the relationship with them? And how are we going to motivate them to work together? Service delivery is interesting, of course, because if you look at Mexico, we know we regularly do research of clients in different jurisdictions. And we know very well from the international clients and the local clients that the top 10 to 15 law firms in Mexico will have the same technology and the same service delivery approach of any law firm globally, because they have to, because you can't service a global client unless you provide them with that standard. If you fall out of that top 10 to 15 firms, you see the issues emerging. This whole concept of modernization of law, and what modernization of law is really about is, we all know small and specialist law firms that are very profitable. And we know that as they grow in size, curiously, the profit will go down. Why is the profit going down as they grow? It's because they need that investment in the back office. So the cost of delivery, we talk about people costs rising, the technology costs, knowledge management, learning and development. So the actual cost of delivery has gone up, and that's no different in Mexico than anywhere else. So law firms have this decision: are we going to remain small and beautiful, focusing by sectors or practice areas? And that really has to be 20 lawyers or 30 lawyers. Or are we going to go through that investment curve to be the right size to have some economies of scale? And we never used to talk about economies of scale in law firms, but we are. And what's interesting on the international law firm point, 10 or 15 years ago, local firms were more concerned about the cultural and control aspects of entering a global firm. Now, they're less concerned, because now the model of the global firms like yours looks more like an alliance relationship. And that's good news, because that's where, if you are a firm that has to do the back office, you can take a leap of faith, and you can plug into an international firm, and you can get all of those supports required. Just to get, before I come back to you for your comments on this, the big difference I see from the domestic firms and the global firms, I don't know if when you enter a global firm, you submit your independence and autonomy at the security desk, because you realize when you've got, how many partners have you got in Denton's?
10,000 lawyers, about 3,500 partners. Yeah.
Right. You know you're never going to have any say in anything in the firm. So the typical partnership model and the attraction of the partnership model was the autonomy and independence of partners. And the question was, why do we need to be in a firm, and how will that firm help me as an individual get to where I want to get to? So in the majority of firms around the world, we are still defining the firm as at the level of the individual practice. It's about my client and my work. And if I don't get what I want from this, I'll go somewhere else. So to go back to this question about growth, especially during a crisis, Many law firms grow because they feel they have to, because they want to promote their junior people. They're not sure about the shape and size they need to be. And the biggest question and challenge is around collaboration. Because imagine the difficult times now. If the first point for me on collaboration is, how are we going to work together to find clients? And how are we going to collaborate across the firm if we're all within our own canoe paddling around the lake? Secondly, once we win the work, how are we going to make sure we allocate that properly to the right lawyer? Because if we're going through a difficult market, I might just start doing more work as a partner. Some of the work I would have given to my colleagues, which goes against the whole point of specialization in a bigger firm. In fact, I don't think I'm going to pass as much work to my senior associates. So for all the managing partners that have told me over the last 12 weeks, our numbers are looking surprisingly well. Our partners are billing very, very high. Just wait and see what work is being done by partners. Look at your utilization rate of your juniors, because it might be that the juniors just aren't getting the work. And if the partners are doing the work at the level of the juniors, just imagine the clients aren't going to pay for that. And the reason I'm talking about collaboration is, I like the quote from Warren Buffett. It's when the tide goes out that we see who's swimming naked. And now is the time in the cycle for law firms that we're seeing huge tensions arising between contribution and remuneration. Some partners will be working exceptionally hard and bringing in revenue at the moment, but what about their colleagues? That really leads to the usual punch up over power and authority. The polite word for power and authority is governance, and what's your governance model? And in a country like Mexico, that will take us very quickly to the fact that the majority of law firms are founder-led. Now, what's happening at the moment is the founder-led partners, the founders, are relying on the younger partners to bring in the work and develop the firm, but are they really ready and willing to hand over the keys to the Mercedes, or in some case the keys to the Porsche? So there's very, very difficult times, and I see these issues coming to the top, and I don't know how firms are doing to raise some of those issues. Does any of that sound familiar to you? I mean, we could look at Dentons as a global entity, or we could look at you as a number of smaller firms where people are at different stages in this modernization and collaboration curve.
Okay, so very briefly, interesting. We have what we call a polycentric model, which has actually served us very well. And that's, I mean, people probably know we've, by headcount, the largest law firm in the world. And we came from 164th largest to largest in the space of 5 years, having done sort of more than 50 mergers.
50 mergers?
Having done M&A for clients all my life, and now ended up doing M&A to ourselves, which was a fascinating experience and rather enriching, actually. But the advantage of that model is that you get the best of both worlds. So on the one hand, you can share institutionalized global clients. Great, you get lots of client referrals from all over the place, which is fantastic. You can share knowledge management systems. There are indeed economies of scale, even on insurance policies, and certainly on our central management, on BD. We did, for example, during COVID, we had what we called a COVID-19 hub, where we just pooled all of our knowledge into a portal that was available globally, on a local jurisdiction basis to all our clients. So those are the advantages of being global. But you're quite right, there are the disadvantages, and this does exist in some firms, and it's a different model and nothing wrong with it, but it's different, whereby everything gets decided in Ohio or wherever, okay?
Yeah.
And that's something we deliberately set out not to do. So everybody in our model, in the polycentric model, we don't have an HQ. Our CEO's in Washington, our CIO is in Paris, our CMO is in London. We're all over the place, and we have a board that's from all over the place. And then we have local boards everywhere who run themselves, who decide their own remuneration, who decide their own pay rises, who decide their own quality control. So they still run, if you like, on an admin basis, and indeed local leadership basis, the way they want. We just do require that certain standards, of course, on a global basis are adhered to, and then we provide the economies of scale, which are the benefit, but not the negative of being part of something so big. So that's the way we've solved it. But just finally, on the point about what's it like, about this transition from founder to
yes, please,
just business like any other. I spent an early part of my career, I worked nearly 10 years actually in Paris, starting in a small firm, which I was seconded to, and then building it up into part of what was then WildSat, now Dentons. And I lived through the 90s, that shift from where nearly all Paris firms were magnificent founder-led, founder-built firms, and watch the Anglo-Saxonization, which is quite possibly a negative term, which I don't disagree with, of the market, where the big American US firms came in. All the kids wanted to go and work for those big global names, and things started to fall apart. So it's a tricky one, but I hate to say it, and I may be saying it in the wrong way to the wrong audience, but I saw it happen in India as well. We're seeing, we're seeing a little bit happening in some of the African markets.
Yeah,
there does seem to be a certain inevitability of, as the market develops, this happening. So I would suggest it might happen, but it's not a bad thing if you get it right. You can retain on a polycentric model as much control as you want.
Well, we all know in every jurisdiction, you ask any room full of lawyers, think of 10 or 15 years ago, think of some of the major firms, and are they still around or not? Did they actually progress to second generation or third generation? So just to finish off there, I've got a couple of things that I think would be on my to-do list if I was a managing partner of one of these local firms. And you tell me if this sounds familiar to you. So I think there's a requirement to be much more honest and to communicate more with the partners in the firm. Some of those founders and some of those managing partners have not been as transparent about this leadership. And I think that partners have to be careful to share objectives, build objectives, and get a feeling of all being in the boat together and trying to achieve things. This is not the time to look at your ownership model and your remuneration, but how to build a consensus. You will know very well that partners in law firms are not very good at sitting around the table together, talking about what they're trying to achieve and talking about what good looks like. I guess when you've got 400 partners, you can't sit around the same table, but if you've got 10 or 20, you can. So I would say, be very open and transparent with each other. And then what you have to do by the autumn, depending on where we get with this horrible illness, it's about trying to be clearer about what people are trying to achieve and their motivation. You were very kindly talking about the associates, but I think that people have to really think about this at the partnership level, how to start having those conversations. And maybe it's a bit like being married. When you've been married for 20 or 30 years, it might not be an easy conversation to start talking about the challenges. And I think that's why sometimes an outsider can come and help get some perspective on that. So, business as usual once COVID is over, Richard, or will we see, this is our conclusions, I guess, will we see profound change, or are you and I going to be talking again about Mexico in 10 years' time and say, none of that stuff happened, we're all just still working in the same way as we were?
No, look, it will definitely happen. The question is, how quickly will it happen, and who's going to be brave enough to embrace the change fast enough? As I said before, my real fear is that people will do the absolute minimum to stay afloat and resist as much change as possible. I think some of the change that's coming, and remember we talked about the difference between the last crisis and this crisis, is going to be quite fundamental and quite seismic and quite brutal, actually. And so I do think there'll be quite a sharp difference between the winners and losers coming out of this, because the economic shock, I said it 3 times, is going to be huge. Yeah. And so we're going to have to get very lean, very clever, very smart, quite quickly. So
here, there's a challenge for the independent firm then. Do you have leaders that are able to be flexible enough to take the opportunity? And do you have the financial muscle required to do that? So what does that mean? That means there'll be more local mergers. The only challenge with a local merger is if I'm in Mexico City, I went to school with these guys and they're my cousins. And if I liked them, I would have worked with them 30 years ago. So looking at the local crowd, I'm not very keen on merging with any of them. Looking at the international crowd, based on what you're saying, there might be less control than there used to be from the global firms. So the model might be better. But I mean, I think that's going to cause a huge challenge for some of those firms that haven't been. The top 10, they're brilliant. They're the best law firms in the world. They've modernized. They have everything you'd expect. They're doing their trial with their artificial intelligence. Some law firms say to me 3 things, and the 3 things scare me. So we can end on this. The one thing I never like anyone to say, and I'm sure none of the participants say this, is we're mid-size. Okay, I don't know what mid-size means. You can be small and beautiful, or you can be big and have economy scale. Mid-size. The second thing, which is equally worse, is mid-market. Well, if I'm a client, I don't want to work with a mid-market law firm. And the only thing that's even worse on top of that is when they say we're full service. Now, I don't worry about the big firms, and I don't worry about the specialist firms. But if anyone on this webinar today is going to tell us they describe themselves as mid-size, mid-market and full service, I think they're going to be in huge difficulty going forward. Thank you very much. I think that's our cue probably to ask back Juan and Alejandro to see whether they have any questions from the audience or whether they have any questions themselves.
Thank you, Rich and Moray. Great presentation, great insights. Tremendous information that everybody needs to keep in mind. And I think you closed on a question that I had, which is if you see any dangers for law firms based on their size. And I think you just comment on that it's something that you have to avoid depending on exactly where you're sitting, if you want to be small or if you want to be large. But do you see any specific, if you turn it to the Mexican reality or to the Latin American reality, how do you see that? Are there benefits for large law firms, or are there benefits for more smaller size law firms, or both?
Well, I'll go quickly, Richard, then I'll look to you. There's a wonderful lawyer in Mexico called Klaus von Weberser. He had a beautiful boutique arbitration firm. He has expanded and he's now in a much bigger entity in a much bigger firm. So that's the option. Are you small and you're a boutique practice? Actually, an issue for those type of firms when they are boutique, it's not the client challenge, because clients always have good work for the top lawyers. It's actually the recruitment challenge. And we haven't really looked at that. But I know that when you go to the local law faculty and you're a boutique 10-partner firm, you will get lost within the noise. And I know it's sad to say, but if you turn up at the recruitment fair and you say I'm part of Greenberg Traurig or I'm part of Hogan Lovells, White and Case, what a glamorous law firm for any young Mexican law student to join. No? It's the people side, maybe more than the client side, that would lead you to want to be in a bigger entity, because you can offer a much wider and better training for your young people. What do you think, Richard, on that question?
Just 2 quick points. I think there are 2 things that matter more than size. I completely understand the challenges and there's no right answer, but I'll tell you what helps you get to the right answer, whatever size you are, in my view. One is differentiation. And I think legal businesses are absolutely hopeless at working out what they're good at and getting the market to know that, and being brave enough not to be all things to all people. And it doesn't matter what size you are. I mean, Murray mentioned a boutique firm, terrific. But even large firms like us, we have to think very hard, and we haven't done enough thinking on it yet. And we have a lot of discussion around the board table on, well, should we really try to be everything to everybody, or actually should we just get famous for a few things? So that differentiation point is super important wherever you sit in the market size-wise, more important than anything else, because you just want clients to go to this firm because that's what they do, regardless of size. The second thing I'd say is delivery model, again. And it's more and more important now. Whatever you're doing, you've got to make a margin. Yeah. So on the one hand, you need to focus and differentiate how you stand out in the market. On the other hand, the firms that win, again, regardless of size, are the ones that embrace smart delivery. And actually, spoiler alert, even part of a huge firm like us, we have great economies of scale, but it's a journey. And the benefits aren't as big, yes, as we would like them to be. And I've seen some very, very, very impressive, some of the firms we've actually combined with, no kidding. And indeed, 2 I can think of right now in Latin America taught us how to deliver more smartly in the back office by a long way than we were practicing as a global firm. So it's not the preserve of large law firms, the way to increase your margin through smart delivery. So smart delivery, differentiation.
Thank you. And probably a last comment on you mentioned, Richard, the managed services part of it, the fixed cost, which is a tremendous new reality that, you know, the few that can manage these and produce these results is certainly a huge advantage. And then the data-driven pricing, which is another thing that you probably need to do 2 or 3 webinars on that specific topic, which is going to transform the legal industry. But if you can just say in a few words, what would be the elements or the main characteristics that you would ideally think the new law firm model needs to have for anyone, even if it has a very small law firm, a mid-size or whatever? What are those main must-haves for the new law firm model?
Okay, so just apart from the 2 things we just said, which I come straight back to, is absolutely number 1 is what are you famous for, and how are you going to deliver that smartly without any doubt at all. The other things that I think are super important, I mean, I think, you know, we always think that, you know, if we're super fantastic lawyers, then that's a differentiator in the market. It isn't. Everyone's a super fantastic lawyer, frankly. I'm sure everybody on this call is. You know, we're 2 a penny. It doesn't matter how clever we are. It's not a differentiator. So what else have you got? So it's a very important thing. But apart from the delivery model, I think smart use of technology is hugely important. I also think really good leadership, really thoughtful leadership, thought about succession, bringing through the next generation, giving oxygen to the whole team is a massively important driver, again, towards profits and margin. Yeah, I think those are my 3 tops. Those are my 3 tops. And I think there's a lack of inspirationally good, empowering leadership. I mean, we talk about LEAR, leadership, empowerment, accountability, and recognition. And a lot of work needs to be done around that to make a successful, sustainable team. Quality of leadership in law firms, frankly, is not at its highest, because that's not the sort of personality most of us are, natural leaders. Empowering others is the way to become a good leader. Accountability systems is hugely important, because we all argue about remuneration, don't we? And without proper accountability systems, I think that's something that's hugely lacking in our business compared to other sectors. And then you can recognize people, and recognition doesn't necessarily mean reward in terms of money, because as we said before, it's not just a contract. It's about inspiring people and saying thank you and celebrating the success they make.
Excellent. MORAY, any final comments?
No, that's it. And the leadership bit is the red line through all of this. But if you don't have the right leadership in your firm, what are you going to do? You know, send them away to study at Harvard for a week, but they might come back cleverer, but with the same personal approach. So again, to go back to this point about consolidation in markets, merger might be the way you're actually looking to gain the leadership you don't currently have internally. But that's a difficult one to raise with your colleagues when you start to think about what are your options going forward. That's the elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about. So thank you very much, Juan. Thank you for inviting us.
MORAY, thank you. It's a pleasure having you. Thanks for the time, and thanks for accepting the invitation. We'll be speaking shortly, because you are going to be obviously our guests at the Lawit Legal Summit, and I'll have Alex just briefly comment on the last on the following events. Alex, if you want to comment.
Yes, for next week, on June 30th, we have Michelle De Stefano, another rock star in the legal industry, just like the duet that we had today, which is amazing wealth of information for the smaller boutique or not so boutique law firms in Mexico, and also the big firms. And obviously receiving this kind of information in such a friendly and open way from the largest law firm in the world, Denton's, and from MORAY's experience in the Latin American countries, especially in Mexico, and being married to a Spaniard, a very good friend of ours. This is, I think, very, very useful information. And I agree that leadership is absolutely key in these times. And then Michelle will be talking exactly, perhaps a continuation, because she's going to be talking about new law, the big fours. They used to be accountants, now they're lawyers, they're everything. So this is a very interesting talk that we're going to have next week. And yes, please share with us the comments in the LinkedIn pages and YouTube. And then the legal competition that we just started in Latin America, this is open for startups that are already working in solutions within the 5 last years. They don't have to be new things, they can be proven things. And what we want to do is at no cost to expose this talent that we have in Latin America to the outer world. And we do have judges from all over the place. They're friends of ours, and they do have the muscle to expose these solutions in the global market. And then just to finalize, we do have our Legal Vision 2020, which is our physical event in person on October 15th in Mexico City. It's a 500-seat event. We already have like 350 tickets sold. The tickets and all the information can be seen at legalsummit.lowitgroup.com. You can register there and buy your tickets. And it is a full, almost a 12-hour event. Starts at 7:30 in the morning, and we will be closing with a network cocktail with the speakers and very key people at around 6:30, 7 p.m. And as always, just a phrase to remind you that in times of turbulence, the biggest danger is to act with yesterday's logic. It is time to reinvent ourselves and just take care of all the details and all the information that our two friends shared today, from the huge firm to a local firm. And then thank you and wish you a great weekend for all of you. And take notes, go back to our YouTube channel, Lowit Group. You will be able to see this recording. You can share it. Please share it with your networks, with your friends at universities, teachers, students, and obviously all the people in your law firms or legal departments, so they can take advantage of this priceless information that our two friends just shared with us today. So thank you very much. Have a great time today and the rest of the week. And stay safe. And thank you very much, MORAY and Richard. Also, you stay safe in your sides of the world.
Thank you very much.
Yes, we'll be looking forward to seeing you in Mexico City in a couple months. Thank you.
Can't wait. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very
Bye-bye.
much. Take care.
Thank you very much, everybody.